this video, we are going to look at one-step buttonhole sewing machines. So generally speaking, they are common on computerized machines, although you do get one-step buttonhole features on advanced manual machines. Now, what you will notice about a one-step buttonhole machine is that you will have to have a very specific buttonhole foot, and it looks like this. So you will notice that there is similarity to the four-step buttonhole foot in the sense that there is a hook at the top and there is two little crooks at the bottom. But the difference is mainly that there is a gauge, and you need that in order to make the one-step buttonhole function work. You'll also notice that at the top, there is a place to measure your button. So unlike on the four-step buttonhole gauge where you had to use those little red markers to work out how big the buttonhole should be, this just does it automatically. So it's a very, very intuitive and very clever foot. So we now need to look at calibrating the machines, and if you've got a manual machine, you'll have to change the setting of the width and the length by hand. So you're looking at a stitch width of about 3.5 to 5 millimeters and a stitch length of somewhere between 0.4 and 0.6 millimeters. On computerized machines, whilst there's lots of differences between all the varieties that are out there, generally speaking, if you just select the buttonhole that you want, your machine will automatically set the length and the width. So in this case, my length is 0.4 millimeters and the width is 5 millimeters, and it's telling me to use foot R, which is this one. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our buttonhole foot onto the machine. Now this buttonhole foot is a little bit clunky, so it can be quite tricky to navigate underneath this part of your machine. So a really useful tip is that if you take your presser foot lever and lift it all the way to the top, you'll notice actually it's on a spring, and that spring just gives you that extra bit of depth in order to help you get this foot on. So I'm going to place this on and click it into position. There we go. And the next thing we're going to do is pull down this buttonhole lever. Now, this buttonhole lever sits between the gauge, and your machine will automatically walk your foot up, and when that lever hits this top part of the gauge, it will know when to do the other part of the buttonhole. So all in all, this is a very clever little foot and very intuitive. So that lever's down, the foot is in position. So the next thing I need to do is add some interfaced fabric. So like before, I'm just going to hold this thread. I'm going to drop that needle, and all I need to do is press go. So this is the finished buttonhole, and I think it looks absolutely beautiful. Just need to trim those tail threads off. Now, a couple of things to know. My machine automatically stopped when it got to the end of the buttonhole. Your machine might not necessarily do that, so don't automatically assume that it will stop. You may need to physically stop putting pressure on your foot pedal. The other thing that's probably worth noting as well is it's a good idea to reset the stitch to the beginning of the buttonhole as and when you do your buttons and every time you start a new one. And this is especially relevant if for whatever reason you may need to stop a buttonhole halfway through. You might have run out of bobbin, for example, or you've made a slight mistake, because what will happen is your machine will pick up the stitching from where it left off, and you don't want that. So that's just really worth noting. But that is in theory how you do a one-step buttonhole. So the last thing we need to do is to open up these buttonholes, and there's several ways you can do this. Now, a very common recommendation in patterns is that you get a pin and you run it across the top of your buttonhole, and then when you come in with your seam ripper, you are able to run it up and the pin will stop it from accidentally ripping through these top stitches and subsequently into the garment. So that is this method. You can also choose to stop halfway through the buttonhole. So I'm just going to open that to about the middle, and I'm going to come in from the other side and I'm going to open that to the middle, and that there allows you to open up that buttonhole. And then the final way, and I love this way, is that you place your point of your seam ripper, your pointy part of the seam ripper through the bottom, and then you find its opposite side from the underneath, essentially folding the buttonhole in half, and then you can run it up to the middle and you have opened that up. And these will then fit your buttons through beautifully.